Hello all, I thought I'd make a quick video about something that's been in the news lately. Well, probably not very lately by the time this video comes out. Basically, it was recently announced that we would be getting double-decker Eurostar trains, and a lot of people have been asking me about them. This is pretty big news because here in the UK we don't have double-decker trains. We've had double-decker trams, but double-decker trains have proven to be a bit of a non-starter. The issue is loading gauge. The loading gauge is, basically, the official measurements that dictate how high and wide a train can be. This, in turn, determines the measurements of bridges, tunnels, and the positioning of things like signals, platforms, and line-side barriers. Our loading gauge is smaller than that of other countries, in particular those of mainland Europe, which use what's known as burn gauge. At first, this wasn't a problem. Initially, there was no need for British wagons to be compatible with overseas railways. But with the introduction of rail ferries, there actually was a need for rolling stock that could be operated across multiple loading gauges. Special carriages and vans were built that could run internationally. With the opening of the Channel Tunnel, of course, international trains became more common. But, as Britain has the smaller loading gauge, that dictated the size of international rolling stock, which of course means that such trains have a smaller capacity. All this loading gauge stuff is the main reason why Britain doesn't have double-decker trains. We did experiment with them. In 1949, a pair of double-decker trains were introduced under British Railways for trials on the line out of Charing Cross to Dartford. This was a crowded commuter line, one of many crowded commuter lines out of London, and it was felt that increased capacity was desperately needed. The Class 4DDs were designed by Oliver Bulleid of the Southern Railway as an experiment in relieving the pressure. They used every available inch within the loading gauge, sacrificing grab handles on the sides and having windows sticking into the roof on the upper deck. And even then it wasn't a true double-decker. The foot space for the upper deck stuck into the head space of the lower deck. Even with these compromises, the trains were not a success. They required longer stops at stations to unload, they were uncomfortable, and after going to all that trouble to add an upper deck, passengers tended not to use it. They preferred to stand on the lower deck than sit on the upper. Only the prototype trains were built and they lasted in service until 1971. The conclusion was that double-decker trains were impractical, and the fairly small additional capacity wasn't worth the enormously expensive and complicated work needed to convert the network to an appropriate loading gauge. So what's changed? Well, high-speed rail. Loading gauge isn't the only factor that limits Britain's railways. We're also limited in how fast trains can go because the curves and gradients of our main lines were designed for trains that look like this, not trains that look like this. The Channel Tunnel rather showed the British network up. France had had dedicated high-speed railways for years, the TGV or Train à Grande Vitesse lines. Eurostar trains could run over those to the Channel Tunnel, but once they got to England, they were stuck on old railways that they shared with conventional commuter trains. The slowness of Eurostar trains through Kent was frankly embarrassing. The solution was High Speed 1, aka the Channel Tunnel Rail Link. This was Britain's first new main line since the 19th century. It was a line specifically for trains from Europe, running from Folkestone to St Pancras in London. And the opportunity was taken to build it to burn gauge. Why not? The Eurostars would only be running over this route. It wasn't like they needed to be able to traverse every inch of the network. The Eurostar E320 trains benefit from this, being larger than the older Class 323 trains that had to be built for conventional railways. And that, in short, is why we can now have double-decker trains, on some lines at least. We could theoretically run them on High Speed 2 as well, but since the cancellation of the northern leg, High Speed 2 trains will have to be able to run over conventional railways. The other big problem, the time to get passengers on and off the trains, isn't such a problem when you only have a very limited number of stops. The planned trains, the Celestia type, are just 16 centimetres, or a little over 6 inches, taller than the E320s. 30 trains have been ordered, with the first 6 planned to go into service in 2031. There's an option for 20 more. They're being built by Alstom. The trains are to be 200 metres long and will have about 540 seats. Typically, though, 2 trains would be coupled together, meaning that you could get over 1,000 people in there. That being said, the E320s have 902 seats, so if you think double decks mean twice as many passengers, well, they don't. However, every little helps. Eurostar has hitherto held a monopoly over train services through the Channel Tunnel, but the Office of Rail Regulation announced earlier this year that they intend to allow other operators to compete. The general hope I have seen among observers and enthusiasts online is that this could lead to more and better, and maybe even, don't want to jinx it, cheaper services. The trains would be serviced at Temple Mills Depot, which is the only depot capable of stabling them. However, more capacity is needed, and Eurostar have announced their intention to expand this. There's also the question of where they'd be built. Alstom has a factory in Britain at Derby, but it doesn't have the capacity to build Celestia trains. And even if it did, how would you get them from Derby to London? It looks like these trains would have to be built in Europe. Now, this isn't a problem in itself, but from the selfish point of view of someone in Britain, it's unfortunate that we can't take advantage. At present, everything is rather up in the air. These trains will be built, assuming nothing dreadful happens, but really they need to be viewed as part of a wider programme. Both Eurostar and their potential competitors have been talking about adding extra services to destinations across Europe, even reopening mothballed international stations in Kent. There could be some interesting developments in the pipeline. Sorry, that's quite a derogatory thing to call the Channel Tunnel, isn't it? Well, I do hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, please do click the like button, and you may wish to subscribe for more. My main sources today were the BBC, The Guardian, The Independent, and the book Work, The Building of the Channel Tunnel Rail Link by Stephen Bailey. I would like, as always, to thank my donors on Ko-fi, on Patreon, and here on YouTube for your ever-generous support. You are the extra seats to my double-decker train. And I will see you all again very soon. Cheerio.